we're here at PestWorld, and we're hearing these reports about the bed bugs in the news here in Paris. What do you think? Are things really getting worse there, or is this mostly media driven?
I think they are probably both. Uh, I have seen reports as early as probably last year where they document a lot of serious issue in low-income housing and in disadvantaged community in France, where bed bugs issues are actually becoming more chronic. And of course, at the same time, because Olympic is just around the corner, so obviously it raised a lot of concern if such situation remains. And that's why when politicians actually talk about it in their parliament, so it get picked up by news media, and of course media basically expand it, and that's why we are seeing massive amount of report all over the place. Yeah.
So, another thing that we're kind of interested in is from a global perspective. How are the tools that in places like Europe and Asia different from what we have here in the States?
I would say they are probably much more limited in the Europe, especially in terms of the chemical that they could use, especially indoor. Unlike in the US and in Asia, we have much more choices of chemical compound that we could use. So that leaves Europe with less option when it comes to the tools that they have to manage bed bugs, especially in the poorer disadvantaged communities. On the other hand, in Asia, there are still many of the compounds that are still allowed to be used. For example, in many countries in Southeast Asia, people could still use organophosphates, for example, for bed bug treatment. And that has been one of those so-called tools that they use whenever they experience pyrethroid resistance bed bugs. Yeah, so that could really take care of the problem real quick. But at the same time, obviously, resistance is happening already. So now we are seeing that those options are slowly closing, very, very soon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that perspective because there is a lot of interest in what are folks doing in other parts of the world. So thank you for
Exactly.
that.
Yeah.
So, another thing we've heard about is international travel. That's really picked up post-COVID. How do you think that's impacted bedbug populations?
I think yes. In some countries, they have seen a tremendous surge of the bedbugs problem in hotels, which of course during COVID there are less travel. So either it's less documented or people, because people are not staying in those public accommodation places. So obviously there are less number of reports. But at the same time, post-COVID, people are traveling tremendously. Now we are seeing, multiple reports coming from all over the place. Yeah, I just spoke to a PCO, from Asia. She's from China. And then there's a tremendous surge in the number of bed bugs infestation in hotels actually in China after China started opening up, about a year ago.
And you touched on this a little bit, but resistant strains. What are PMPs and researchers seeing in the field in terms of resistant strains? Are they becoming more prevalent?
Yeah, so there was a paper published in last 2 years from Dr. Warren Wolf's lab. And what he has seen is over the last 15 years, he collected bed bug samples from the last 15 years. And there has been incident where, back in 2005 to 2007, he could still see susceptible strain that are susceptible to pyrethroid in the field. And these are obviously bed bugs that are KDR, they are not KDR resistant. But fast forward, to 2019, those so-called susceptible, insects are no longer there. So obviously, over the trend of time, we have actually seen tremendous, increase in the number, at least for KDR resistant bed bugs in the field. Not only that, probably some 7-8 years ago, when mixture insecticide was introduced, they are really effective, mixture insecticide. But now there are also issues with mixture insecticide where insecticide that contain pyrethroid and neonicotinoids, some PCO are documenting and also talking about they are no longer effective as what they have experienced. Yeah.
And then sort of a big picture question. So as a researcher, what have we learned about bed bugs and where is there a need for more research?
So this is a very difficult question, right? Obviously, you know, they are highly resilient, as you know, we have seen, and if we track throughout history, bedbug has always been a big problem of, you know, that because they are closely associated with human. And then when DDT and all these organic insecticide was introduced back in the 40s, bedbug problems declined tremendously. And at that point of time, up to the point when it reaches maybe 1960s, you know, to late 60s, bedbug is no longer an issue in different parts of the world. But then, you know, fast forward 30 years later, we are seeing that they are coming back. So what have we learned from there? Essentially, one of the biggest issue is resistance is happening, okay? Because almost practically every population that we collect from the field, we are seeing pyrethroid resistance. But what is more interesting is, irrespective of whether they are tropical or they are common bedbugs, they are both resistant to pyrethroid. So there came a question, are we seeing bedbugs? Why are we seeing bedbugs, two species of bedbug, you know, that basically separated geographically in the past? We are seeing them coming back together and then having both populations or all these so-called populations in the field that are resistant. Could they have originated from the same location? So that has always been one of those so-called fundamental questions that I always like to answer. And if you have seen, these both species can actually be found in Africa, okay? And they are found indoor, along with, of course, you know, other pests. And in the 60s, when they were doing indoor residue spray against malaria vector, they were applying DDT on the wall. And this could indirectly select for bedbug resistance. And then fast forward, they were using permethrin bed nets, and that could also select for bedbug resistance. And because DDT and permethrin are sharing similar mode of action, that potentially could have selected bedbugs. And that's why many of the bedbugs that we are seeing in the field have KDR resistance. But to answer that, that's still quite a long way to go. Obviously, we need samples from all over the world before we can come up with that conclusion.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that perspective. There's certainly no shortage of topics for bedbug researchers.
Absolutely. Yes.
And then the last question I had for you, though, is specific to your work at UC Riverside. Can you tell us what you and your team are working on in terms of bedbugs?
Sure. So at UC Riverside, we work with, besides bedbugs, we also work with German cockroach and, of course, subterranean termites. But we are investigating many of the newer options available or newer strategies that are available for bedbug control. And hopefully we can close the gap where many of these so-called effective methods out there, they are expensive, which cannot be afforded by the people in the low-income housing. And we are trying to close that gap so that we can have something that is more affordable at the same time effective. And that's what we are working at UCR. But stay tuned, papers will be out in the near future. So, okay, all right.
Well, thank you so much, Chow-Yang, for joining us and sharing with us some of your background working with bed bugs and some of what you got planned down the road here at UC Riverside. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Brett. Thank you.